Hey there, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. It's your old friend VK back with another average YouTuber reacts to reaction videos on YouTube. And today we're going to be looking at Vlogging Through History, who is doing a reaction to the Great War's mid-1915, 1916 blunders video. And what we're going to be watching is to see whether or not VTH, who has made his trade on doing reaction videos to other people's original content, is successfully able to perform the transformative nature required in order for fair use. For those of you who don't know, VTH recently received 2 copyright strikes from YouTuber CGP Grey. I've never watched Grey. I don't know anything about this person. But as we're going to discuss, VTH seems to understand that what he's doing is adding his own, maybe not so unique spin to what some other vloggers, YouTubers, content creators are doing. I watched this one once before, which is a level of effort that I don't think VTH did much with himself. So I will have a few thoughts on this as to whether or not he's successfully able to transform. And I want to apologize to the Great War video. People, I watched them quite regularly back in the day, and I am going to be playing your full video here, not out of this sort of parody satire sense that I'm doing for VTH, but because he's the one who kind of ripped off your stuff. So let's go ahead and kick this off.
Back everyone to another reaction video. Well, I've been diving into the recommended videos over on Discord. We have a channel where you can suggest videos for reactions. There's some great ones there. There's a few that I probably can't do because of copyright reasons and things like that, but all great.
Wow, so immediately he gives away the game. The simple fact of the matter is he is aware that if he were to take, I don't know, like an episode of Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan and just watch the whole thing on his YouTube channel and stop at every 2 minutes to give an interjection, that it wouldn't be considered fair use and he would receive a copyright strike from the holders therein. So he's already aware of this fact. He's using this content because it's less likely to get him a copyright strike. Let's go back to VTH.
We're actually going to take one of those suggestions today, and this one comes from our friend Indy Nidell, who I know is a subscriber of Vlogging Through History. Hey, shout out to you, Indy. Hopefully we'll connect one of these days and be able to collab on something.
So here's the other thing about VTH. His early content is him visiting historic sites during the pandemic near where he lives and trying to provide context on them as a consumer of that site. It's not great content, but it's earnest and heartfelt. And he decided to do a charity stream for the American Battlefield Trust, which is a charity that primarily organizes, battlefields from the American Civil War and preserves them. And that charity stream did numbers. It did like 120,000 views, whereas his early videos were getting 1,000 or 2,000 views. And all of a sudden, he ended up going down this live stream reaction hole. Jumping, he would watch a Sabaton video and comment on the Bismarck, or he would watch an epic rap battle of history and make comments about, oh, he didn't really, that Churchill line was real sick. So, and every time he tried to do something that was not that was more of an honest reflection or a historical commentary, the view counts dropped. So, what he really has been doing is chasing clout, jumping on bigger YouTube channels. And this is just it here. He's chasing clout. He wants Indy Nidell, who was at the time host of a pretty big historical channel. I think he's not as big as he was. Recognizing that the Indy Nidell YouTube user follows him, which he probably follows a lot of people. Not necessarily because he watches it. I don't know Indy, obviously, but I imagine he probably just follows a bunch of historical channels. And he's kind of just like, hey, give me some clout. I could use some clout. All right, let's keep going.
Video from the Great War channel. If you want to see his more current stuff, he's currently part of the Time Ghost team doing the videos on World War II week by week. And I know he's going to be in Normandy here doing a fantastic production coming up here in just a few weeks for D-Day.
So here's another thing that really bothers me about VTH. At least in this video, he didn't link anywhere to the actual video. He doesn't really want you going back and viewing that video. I think that says something about kind of what he wants you to do. He wants you to keep watching his videos. He doesn't want you to go and watch this more interesting source.
And I'll probably be mentioning more about that as we get a little closer. But this is the top 10 stupid moves of World War I. So if you want to make suggestions, you can do that on any video. Just reply in the comment section. You can use the link in the description to head over to Discord and go on the channel for video recommendations and post the link there. I want to let you know too that I am almost done editing my next video from France. And that is my video from the site of Hill 223, which is where Alvin York earned his Medal of Honor late in the war in October of 1918. Excited to bring that story.
I believe it. I think this is his real passion, is going to historical places and documenting them. I haven't watched that video because, I haven't done that much work. I'm trying to emulate the level of work VTH does for his reaction videos. I have no doubt it's earnest and heartfelt. And I'd link it, but he doesn't link his stuff, so I'm not going to do it because that's the point of this sort of parody satire thing we got going on here.
One of the longer videos that I did from France, because there's a lot of that story to tell, and I tell his whole story from the very beginning before the war even started. So check that out when that comes out here in a few hours. Make sure your notifications are turned on and you're subscribed so you don't miss that when it arrives. Let's dive in. I should mention as well, this is specifically the top 10 stupid moves of World War I in mid-1915 and 1916. They've got multiple stupid moves but this is the one that was recommended to me. Also, quick shout out to all of our patrons. Thank you for everything that you do. You make it possible for me to bring you the content that I do.
Are these his patrons and not Indian Idol's patrons? Is that what's happening here? He's kind of put his patrons up in the video spot, so I don't know, it just seems like it might be a little dishonest.
So I appreciate that.
While ago of what we thought were the stupidest moves of the first year of the war by all nations. And it went over pretty well, not just because a lot of people watched it, but also because a lot of people wrote in with things they felt also had a place on the list. It was the kind of interaction we love, and so we're back with Stupid Moves Round 2. I'm Indian Idol. Welcome to a Great War top list of the 10 stupidest moves of the First World War from the summer of 1915 to the end of 1916. Now remember, you are under no obligation to agree with me, and I urge you to vent your disagreement in the comments.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Number 10, Tsar Nicholas takes over.
So one of the interesting things about VTH is he always breaks his, and you can see here, always kindly breaks things down into chapters. I approve that. But he put a whole chapter aside for the introduction and then didn't say anything during it other than a small yes. Why even do that? If I'm here to watch your content, VTH, why put a chapter break in for something where you do not provide any content? It's almost like it's not really about what you say. It's like it's about what Indy and the person you're reviewing is going to say.
Personal command of the Russian armies. This happened at the beginning of September 1915 when he appointed himself to replace Grand Duke Nikolai, who was shuttled off to command in the Caucasus.
First of all, can we just comment on who the heck is this guy he's talking to? Does anybody know? I'm not familiar enough with the Russian military in the First World War to know, but who the heck is this crazy tall guy he's talking to, and how tall really is he? Anyway, I'll probably wait until the end of each one of these mistakes to give my reaction to it.
So you couldn't comment on who this person was because you don't know and you didn't do any research. So what you did was you stopped the video and added nothing other than to say, whoa, dude tall. Ever see Shaq? He's tall. This guy's tall.
Now, the new chief of staff, Mikhail Alexeyev, was really the one in actual charge. But the future of the Tsar, as personal leader, was now tightly bound to the success or failure of his armies. And while there would be some great successes, the people remembered the failures far more easily. Number 9.
So yeah, absolutely true. We've talked about this before. Tsar Nicholas II just has too many things going against him to be committing self-inflicted wounds, which is what he does way too often. This is a guy who I don't think was a bad person at all. I think he was a...
Okay. Somebody needs to look up pogroms and see what happened to the Jewish populace under Nicholas. Or look up the 1905 revolution and see why the average Russian citizen was not happy. Or read the details of what happened to his family while he was dealing with the war. You know, they fell in with a Russian mystic who cuckolded him, and his children were a bunch of maladjusted roustabouts. See, I'm just saying things based on kind of my basic historical knowledge of this period. I didn't do any research. I just insinuated a bunch of stuff. But I don't think we can call Tsar Nicholas II a good guy. He was a freaking czar. I don't want to do this too much, but it's really easy just to make these off the cuff comments that don't add any actual historical value, and they don't transform what Indy's saying, because he's not commenting on whether or not Nicholas II made a mistake here. He's just saying, "Cool guy. He screwed up. Okay."
He was a good guy. He was certainly a good father and a good husband, but he made some really, really poor choices as a leader. A lot of the things that get him deposed in 1917 are self-inflicted wounds. They're decisions he makes that he didn't need to make, with everything else that was already going against him, and taking personal command of the military. Let's face it, if things had gone well on the Eastern Front and Russia had, thrown back the Germans and kind of pushed into Germany and won the war, Nicholas would have been hailed as the hero, and I'm sure that's probably what he was thinking. But because things don't go well, it's just one more mark against him that's going to lead to his downfall.
So once again, is that really transformative? Did he add any valuable context here, other than to say if Tsar Nicholas II had defeated Germany, history would be different? No, he didn't really add any context. Nothing valuable, nothing transformative.
Combo, right? In the spring of 1916, the Italian press and even the French press were full of stories about an Austro-Hungarian buildup of forces on the Italian front that were going to make a huge new offensive against Italy. Italian Army Chief of Staff Luigi Cadorna makes this list for being surprised when that offensive happened. Austro-Hungarian Army Chief of Staff Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf also makes this list for going ahead with the offensive, ironically called the Punishment Expedition, anyhow, even after its plans are announced all over the enemy press. That did not go well for anybody.
Yeah, the Italian front is like one of the forgotten fronts of the war, right? I mean,
unless you're Italian.
People don't talk a lot about it, and we're talking millions of casualties, a lot of it in the exact same place. You have all these multiple battles at Isonzo. Up in these mountains, it's rugged, it's difficult terrain, it's no place to have an army anyway. And yeah, I mean, the last thing, like he said, a couple mistakes here. Number one is getting surprised by an attack that everybody knows is happening, but then still going forward with the attack and not changing your plans at all when everyone knows it's happening. So stupidity on both sides. There's just so many terrible things that happen on this front, and it's one of those ones that doesn't move a whole lot either way, and yet you see these continual casualties just building up, and Austro-Hungary could not afford to be losing millions of men on the Italian front when they're doing so poorly on the Eastern Front against the Russians as it is.
So this is kind of his trick. He starts out by saying it was really, we don't know a lot, which again, that's true of American and North American historiography of the First World War. It's not at all necessarily true of everyone's learned experience, especially those of us who live in Europe, or are Italian, or Austrian, or took a university level course in the First World War or have read more than a book on the First World War. He talks about there was a lot of battles in one place, which is very true. 12 battles of the Isonzo. Talks about how it's very mountainous. Yes, Italy is mountainous. And then he just kind of goes, it's terrible, people died. There's no context being added here. He didn't take the time to break down why these attacks occurred. There was great political pressure to do this, and based on the way supply lines worked and the way the terrain was laid out, it was almost impossible for the battles to occur elsewhere, especially with the technology available in 1915. He doesn't provide you with any of this context. He just says it's terrible. Yeah, why'd they do that? He actually repeats point for point what Indy says in the video, that it is ridiculous that they attacked in one location knowing the attack was coming, and it is ridiculous that they were surprised by the attack they knew were coming. He's not adding any value here. It's not sufficiently changing the original video.
Number 8, German Army Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn's unyielding defense strategy on the Western Front. Now, it's true. He demanded of his men that if they gave up any ground, they must immediately counterattack and retake it no matter the cost. This turned out pretty much as you'd expect it to in hindsight, with thousands upon thousands of needlessly dead German soldiers that could have retreated to better defensive positions. Number 7.
So it's interesting, yeah, Falkenhayn ends up getting fired because of this kind of stuff. But this was the mindset of the day. We've talked about this before, the idea of the cult of the offensive, that it's always better to attack. And you would think by 1916 it should be painfully obvious how strong defensive positions are in this war and how many advantages the defenders have. But the idea was, even if you're being attacked, counterattacking is better than putting up a strong defense. And of course, later on in the war, the Germans are going to learn this is not the case, and they're going to fall back to the Hindenburg Line, where they're going to build strong defenses, and they're going to invite the Allies to attack them. But at this point in the war, they're still making that same stupid mistake of attack, just hurl your men at the enemy, and you don't have the men to spare to keep doing that.
So here he actually tries to add context, which is the cult of the offensive and the later on move to the Hindenburg Line. What he doesn't have handy are sources. Anyone who looked at the title of this video should know that the futility of the Western Front is coming up. There are gigantic battles, Verdun and Somme, on this battlefield that were characterized by futile frontal assaults. He should have things handy. He says he's a historian. It says historian reacts. But he doesn't have any sources handy. He doesn't have anything to read. You could get an excerpt from Storm of Steel, or you could pull out, a battle report from the Somme. You could have something at hand to add to this discussion to emphasize the point. But instead, he throws out stuff that's fairly well known if you've researched the First World War at all. And that's it. End of discussion. A lot of people died. It's true, but Indy's already saying that.
Luigi Cadorna makes the list for a second time as the Italians delay taking advantage of the momentum of their victory in capturing Gorizia and Mont San Michele. They had the Austrians in disarray and completely on the run. And while the road to Vienna wasn't entirely open, it was at least open a crack, and the Austrian heartland beckoned. Cadorna stalled to strengthen his flanks, and the Austrians had 3 days to get their defenses in order. The moment was lost.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the Italian front to really comment on that much, but other than to say, imagine how differently the war could have gone if the Italians did break through into the Austro-Hungarian heartland and did even offer some threat toward Vienna. Because Austria-Hungary is going to have to pull troops off the Russian front. The Eastern front could collapse. The Germans can't cover the whole line. They're trying to cover the butts of the Austrians on that front. Austria has also lost a lot of men down in Serbia and the Balkans. Of course, once Bulgaria enters the war and things like that, Serbia finally collapses. But, boy, the war could have been very different if that had been the case. I have a feeling that stuff related to the Somme and Verdun are going to be our top ones in this one, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know much about making lazy reaction videos on YouTube. In fact, I literally just kind of figured this out in the last 40 minutes, and I've been filming already for 20. But I do know that maybe things would be different if lazy reaction YouTubers did a modicum of pre-work and brought something interesting to the table instead of just saying, what if they break through the Austrian heartlands? I don't think he looked at a map, because anyone who's looked at a map would know that the Isonzo is not just like one barrier. The Alps are massive, and they continue all the way through Austria, basically right to Vienna. If you get to the Austrian heartland, you've invaded Vienna on the axis that would be required to attack from northeastern Italy. This is not something that is unknown. It's just a nonsense comment. The war would be different if Italy beat Austria. Yeah, thanks. Okay.
6, the Germans not rotating their troops at Verdun. See, at that battle, the longest
France
of the
did.
war, German losses were just topped up, and the men who survived there just stayed on and on. The French, on the other hand, rotated in fresh divisions and rotated out exhausted ones. You can see what this meant. As the months wore on, the Germans grew ever more weary and demoralized as many of their battalions took casualties of over 100%. While I'm talking about Verdun, I will throw another German error into the list at number 5.
All right, so let's stop there and talk about Verdun for a second. Verdun is kind of remembered as one of the meat grinders of the war, and having been there now, it's probably the place more than any other place I've ever stood on planet Earth, and granted there's a lot of places I haven't been, where I have felt the weight of the death and the horror and the destruction that was there. It's just everywhere. And to look into those windows and see the bones of thousands of soldiers from both sides who died there, really for very little to change. But yeah, you go to the Douaumont ossuary there and you see the list of all the French regiments who fought there. There's hundreds of them, because pretty much every member of the French army rotated into Verdun. Verdun was an awful place. And if you were there for very long, yeah, it would have been really, really rough. There have been studies I know that were done in World War II about the peak effectiveness of soldiers and how being on the front line for more than a few weeks just destroyed your psyche. Imagine being at a place like Verdun for months without being rotated to a quieter part of the line. Yeah, absolutely a huge mistake on the Germans' part to not rotate men out of there, because they were on the attack constantly, and they're losing tens, hundreds of thousands of men attacking these fortifications of the French.
I think this is the closest he comes to really adding something to the video, and it's because, again, this is his sort of passion, is visiting these historical places, learning about them, and, feeling about them. He's emoting here. He's visited this very sacred place in France, the ossuary. He's seen the names. And he can honestly bring a real reaction to it, something that he understands a little bit more intrinsically than his specious alternate histories. And I don't really know that much about this, and the Tsar Nicholas is a good person actually takes that he's sort of slapping in. I don't think on its own it's enough to make the video particularly transformative. I imagine he probably did a video about this location. It's probably pretty okay to watch. But yeah, let's continue.
Failure to destroy or at least disrupt traffic on the Sacred Road.
Ooh,
now, this
yeah.
road was the one and only French supply route into Verdun. All of the men, ammunition, and supplies for Verdun arrived from that road in endless 24-hour traffic. Men stood by on the roadside to push any trucks that broke down off the road so traffic never stopped. In the first few months of the battle, Germany had air superiority there, and yet they did not attack the road. Doing so with even partial success would have crippled the French at Verdun.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine you go in and strafe a few vehicles, and now instead of one vehicle that needs pushed off the road, say you line up 10 or 12 destroyed vehicles to block that road. It literally was the lifeline to Verdun. And 24/7 pouring in. You cut that off, the French are done. I mean, they are really, really done at Verdun. Huge. It's not something I really thought about, but with air superiority, there's no reason the Germans couldn't have been flying some bombers. They had those big Gotha bombers. They could have been dropping bombs on that road. It's an easy target. You've got men lined up. We saw something like this happen in the Gulf War in 1990-91, where they had this highway of Iraqi vehicles that were just destroyed, and you could just see for miles destroyed vehicles. They could have done that there.
No.
So I don't want to, again, get too deep into the history portions of this because I've watched this once and I've looked a couple things up. But this is just bad history. Bad history. Gotha bombers weren't mainline until 1917, well after the Battle of Verdun was complete. And the air-ground capacity of the air forces available in 1916 were fairly limited. You could machine gun some trucks and you could do some damage. But you would need to put a lot of aerial resources into stopping that road from functioning. I get you're looking at these videos of Iraq from, 2003, where the United States successfully, chomped up one of the only highways. But they did that with AC-130s and B-52s and A-10s, gigantic weapons of war. Not canvas kites with a machine gun that barely fired and sometimes ricocheted off the plates on the propeller and killed the person. The heavy bombers were not yet a thing, despite what he says. It's just specious, kind of nonsensical stuff. I guess it transforms the video into fiction at this point, but other than that, he's still not adding anything here. There's no new nuance created.
Number 4, the failure of the British and French to coordinate at the Somme. Well, this lack of coordination was disastrous. Plans would be made, and then attacks of 5 battalions would happen at completely different times for random reasons, and they would all fail. Artillery from one unit would fail to support its neighbor because it didn't know what was going on. And attacks on areas where there was clearly no breakthrough possible would not be called off. The lack of communication and coordination was staggering in scale.
That's one advantage that Germany has on the Western Front throughout the war, is that pretty much the whole Western Front is German. Whereas on the Allied side, you've got the French and you've got the British and later on the Americans, and you've got some Russian troops and others. And so there are multiple competing commands with desire to be under their own command. The Americans absolutely refused to be under anybody else's command, even though they were kind of under the French command. And so there's a lot of that going on. The reason the Somme was picked in the first place is because that was where the French and British sectors of the Western Front came together, was at the Somme. It was not the best place to launch a major offensive, but it was the place where those two armies came together. And so for a joint assault, that's the place to go. Of course, Verdun happens a couple months before the Somme, and so the French end up committing fewer resources to the Somme. And the French still are the ones who break through on the southern end of the line, but I'm sure there's going to be more about the Somme in this.
I think it's really telling how often he has to relate it back to the American experience. Frankly, the American integration into Allied forces in the First World War isn't really relevant to the style of communication differentials. It's a very, weak attempt to make it seem like an apple is an orange. And it's also not fair to say that Germany had the advantage of being one country. Functionally, Germany was an empire that integrated multiple different units. And again, if you go read some primary sources, it's made clear in some places that there were units that didn't participate with the same level of vouloir that, other units did. This is normal. And the other flip side of that is look at Russia. Russia had, gigantic challenges with coordination, and they all spoke Russian, but they just allowed their generals to hate each other and literally make decisions on whether or not they would fight a battle based on whether or not they wanted that other general to get ahead. So it's kind of like, that's not really the issue. And it's specious just to throw it in there as context, because he doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Number 3, over in Mesopotamia, the arrival of the British at Kut al-Amara. Charles Townshend had led his men up the Tigris River too far for their supplies and reinforcements to follow, completely underestimating the Ottoman opposition. He soon found his army under siege at Kut. As the months rolled by and relief repeatedly failed to break through, starvation finally forced the British to surrender. It was one of the great humiliations in British military history. And coming on the heels of the failure at Gallipoli, which was on our last list, was a huge blow to British pride. Number 2.
Yeah, so, I mean, everybody has this pretty poor opinion of the Ottomans at this point. The Ottomans had lost some wars that a few centuries earlier they easily would have won, like in the Balkan Wars and things like that. They've been losing territory. They've been plagued by weak leadership for generations. So for the mighty British Empire to lose at places like Gallipoli and now in modern-day Iraq, it was a big blow to the psyche, and it was a big morale boost for the Ottoman Empire.
2.
He literally just repeated Indy's point. Indy said it was a humiliation for the British to lose there at Gallipoli and at Kut. And he just repeated that point. He added 0 things, 0 context.
Russian generals Evert and Kuropatkin refused to attack. In the summer of 1916, Russian General Alexei Brusilov's offensive was smashing through the Austro-Hungarian lines like a hot knife through butter, and there was a very real possibility that Austria would be knocked out of the war. Those 2 other generals, far to the north, had 750,000 men and 75% of the Russian artillery. All they had to do was tie down the Germans in the north to prevent them from reinforcing the Austrians facing Brusilov. They didn't. They did not attack until it was way too late and the moment of possible victory had passed.
Boy, so often in war, it's about timing, right? You know, there are times when if things happen just a little sooner or a little later, completely changes the outcome of a battle or of a campaign. And this is a perfect example of that. The Brusilov offensive was supposed to be timed with the offensives on the west to put pressure at the same time on both fronts, because the Central Powers have limited ability to cover this ground, and so you're depriving them of the ability to move units back and forth. And part of that means that sometimes you have to hold down units in place. In the American Civil War, this was supposed to happen at the Battle of Fredericksburg, for example, where the attack on Marye's Heights, which everybody remembers as this debacle where the Union just sends wave after wave up the hill to be slaughtered, that was not supposed to be the main attack. That was just supposed to hold Longstreet's men in place so they couldn't reinforce on the Confederate right, which is where they were trying to break through Stonewall Jackson's line, and they actually had some success in that. But because they didn't follow up that attack, the diversionary attack turns into a slaughter. Same thing here. You need to attack and hold them so that you can make the breakthrough somewhere else.
Number 1.
The Fredericksburg thing threw my brain completely because it's so out of place. Fredericksburg is a tactical level mistake, and he's right in saying that there was a 2-pronged attack, and Burnside didn't do a great job with it because he was Burnside. But what the hell does Fredericksburg have to do with Russian campaign level challenges? If you want to talk about, the ability to defeat a smaller enemy by projecting force at multiple locations with the American Civil War as an example, shouldn't you use 1864 and the combined Grant-Sherman offensives? You would think that, wouldn't you? Now, the other piece is everything he said about timing in advance. He's right, of course. Timing is an important part of war. But this directly contradicts the point he made about Germany being a uniform polity before. The fact that Germany had better coordination was not because they were one country. It was because They were better trained and equipped. Russia was inept at this, inept in a way the Americans and British and French and other allied forces could not match. So he contradicts himself, doesn't even think about it. I don't even think it registered in his mind.
One on this second list of failures, the timing of the Romanian entry into the war. Had Romania entered the war in June 1916 alongside Brusilov's offensive, Austria-Hungary would likely have fallen, whatever the northern Russian generals had done. Romania, however, did not enter the war until late August, by which time Brusilov's offensive was spent. All four Central Powers immediately sent forces to invade Romania, who could only count on now exhausted Russia for defensive help. Russia was also forced to extend its front lines for hundreds of kilometers to the south, which would prevent any new Russian offensives for the time being. And when Romania fell, Romanian oil and grain would fall into the Central Powers' hands at just the time when they needed it most to be able to even continue the war. So there you have it, our top 10 list for now.
So yeah, I mean, absolutely 100% agree. Again, timing is everything, and a month or two difference changes the outcome. You go from Austria-Hungary being overwhelmed. Imagine if Italy had broken through, if Brusilov's offensive had been more successful, if the Romanians had come at that time. Complete collapse of the Austro-Hungarian front is disaster. But instead, not only did they hold, but now they get oil and grain that they didn't have before, which are desperately needed. And the war is going to be prolonged for another 2 years. Boy, what a different outcome it could have been. For me personally, though.
Yeah, what a different outcome it could have been. How is that adding context here? Indy made some of these points in his portion of it, but this is the sort of crap that I do just hanging around with some history nerd friends. Like, oh, dude, what if so-and-so did such and such a thing? It doesn't contextualize better the video. It's not adding real context, since Indy already said that they would have been better served with a different option, led to better allied outcomes. So I don't know what he thinks he's adding with this, other than other things could maybe have happened if the world was different. History's not about that. History's more about what did happen.
I still feel like... Oh, I just turned myself off there. I meant to do that. I still feel like it's got to be the Somme for me. And maybe it's because I'm in the West, and so I'm much more of a Western-centric person when it comes to the fronts. And to me, the Somme is just one of the great disasters of the war. At least that first day, because eventually there was some success at the Somme later on. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think of this top 10? What would you add? What would you change? What do you think they got right or wrong? Use the comment section below. Again, thank you to all of our patrons. Grateful for your support. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.
He's definitely got a very finely oiled machine.
Welcome back, everyone, to...
Oh, I didn't mean to start another video. Sorry about that. I'm not re-recording this. Once was enough. Yeah, the whole thing is he's got a very smooth, oiled operation. He walks you through a video. He plays the entire video that the Great War team spent a long time on. He does one take, maybe two. I think he only does one take. I don't think he comes into this with any pre-watch or any research done. He says whatever comes to mind, and he prints it. And he gets viewers, and he picks popular channels because he knows that'll bring in more viewers. What he is doing is not a transformative use of the media. He is, in most cases, repeating the same content that was just displayed to you by somebody who did original work to put it there. What he is doing is not correct, and supporting it is wrong. I'm doing this out of a attempt to satirize it. I want you to see how easy it is to do this and how kind of lazy it is. I'm literally just some guy who decided to do it. I learned how to do it in 20 minutes. He's got a little bit more bells and whistles. He's got a green screen. He's got, a Patreon to plug and all that stuff. And he's very well oiled and does all that nicely. And good for him, But I think that if he's doing this, he needs to be honest about what he's doing. He needs to link back. He needs to do some research. He needs to bring real content and transform the video. A really good example of someone who does transformative videos is Real History. And I'll try to link him. He's a history professor at, I think it's the University of Pennsylvania. Don't quote me on that. I'm not looking it up. He watches historical films in small clips and then provides detailed context and backgrounds. In some cases, he knows about the actual filming of it because he was involved in several American historical sites. In some cases, he just knows about the history because he's literally a history professor. So it's far more transformative, and that's the type of content that people like this should be doing. He got a copyright strike because he broke somebody's copyright to make a lazy reaction video that any asshole can make, and I'm the evidence. All right, so if you like that, click the bell so you get notification of future videos, which I definitely won't be doing future videos on this. Make sure you click the like button, subscribe, share it on your Twitter, your Facebook, your Truth Social, your Parler, your MySpace. Send a Morse code message to your best friends in Siam. Put it on a homing pigeon and release it so that it gets to your great-great-grandfather. Do all those great important things and have a great day.